You wake before your alarm, not to a sound but to a hush, an invitation that moves through the room like light through thin curtains. For a long breath you stay still, palms pressed to the covers, heart quietly taut with the same ache you've carried for years, the ledger of hope and worry, dreams tabulated and debts annotated, the hunger for freedom that doesn't feel like selfishness but like survival. On the nightstand your phone glows with messages, one from a friend, one from work, the bank app showing numbers that make your throat tighten. Outside, the city begins its familiar hum, buses sighing, a dog barking twice, a coffee machine warming up. Inside, a different sound arrives. Not a command, not thunder, just a whisper, close as breath, steady as a pulse. It says, simply, there is more. You sit up. The apartment smells faintly of last night's coffee. You run your fingers along the windowsill where dust catches the morning. The whisper does not shout away the fear. It doesn't ask you to pretend the bills aren't real. Rather it leans in and names what you already know, you are restless. You are ready. It points to a possibility that feels half prophetic and half practical, abundance not as a miracle that appears overnight, but as a path that asks you to walk differently. Listen beyond the fear, the voice says. It is kind, seasoned, like someone who has watched many begin and stumble and rise again. It calls you not to reckless hope but to a quiet courage, to notice small openings, to learn simple disciplines, to let faith be the motion that leads your feet. For a moment you hear your own voice answering, a question formed from years of skepticism and longing, how do I begin? This is the beginning. Over the next minutes you will be guided through the first steps, what to look for, what to leave behind, and how to make the voice you heard a daily companion in decisions that matter. If the whisper stirs something in you, like this message and subscribe with the bell to stay with the journey. But before the day pulls you away, there is one small instruction from the voice that will change everything, if you are willing to follow it. You wake before dawn, the room a soft wash of gray, the whisper still warm at the edges of your mind. For a moment you lie very still, listening to the house breathe, the coffee maker ticking in the kitchen, the radiator sighing, a city bus rumbling awake outside. The voice that visited you the night before is not a sermon or a flash of light, it is startlingly ordinary, a murmur that fits into the gaps of your life and asks one question, will you move? Your chest tightens with all the reasons to stay, rent due, a lone notice glowing on your phone, the steady ache of long nights spent over spreadsheets and unpaid invoices. Yet beneath the ache is a softer current, curiosity, a hunger for meaning that money alone never satisfied. You get up. In the kitchen the kettle releases a small prayer of steam and you find yourself speaking aloud, as if to a companion. What would you have me do? You ask the empty room. The whisper answers not with specifics but with a gentle insistence, small, deliberate steps, listen before you leap, steward what you have. The words land like a lantern in fog, enough to guide but not to carry you. You make coffee, thumb through the stack of bills, then stop at a yellowed receipt from a side job you took months ago. A number stands out, more than the sum, it is a sign that tiny actions accumulate. Later, on the bus, a stranger drops a line of advice like an offering. Start with one habit, she says before stepping off, leaving you with a practical echo, one automatic transfer to savings, 1 hour each morning to learn, one conversation with a person who is what you want. Back at your desk you open a blank spreadsheet and begin to map reality, the income you have, the leaks you can plug, the modest investment you might risk. It feels too small and yet also like the hinge on which larger doors will swing. Doubt presses in, old voices telling you this is risky, that safety is courage. But another voice, steadier now, repeats the whisper's counsel, action is faith made visible. You close the laptop with a plan to call an old mentor, to read one chapter tonight, to move $1 from spending to saving. The day narrows into a single, tender promise, listen beyond fear, then move. Tomorrow, the world will test that resolve. You wake with sunlight slicing through thin curtains, the city breathing in rhythms you've learned to ignore. The whisper is still there, not loud, but persistent, like wind threading through branches, there is more for you. You sit on the edge of the bed, heart an instrument tuned to both hunger and doubt. The apartment smells of coffee and possibility. On the table, a worn notebook waits with a single sentence you scribbled last night. What if I listened? You rise and move through a morning that feels both ordinary and sacred. In the elevator, a neighbor, the barista who always folds a smile into your change, asks, "You look different today." You almost laugh, then answer honestly, "I'm trying to follow a whisper." She nods as if she knows the language of small risks. Her simple encouragement lands like a coin in your palm, small, heavy, useful. Back at the kitchen table, you make a quiet covenant. No grand plan yet, just 3 small acts: tally the real numbers, call one person who believes in you, and commit 30 minutes daily to learning. The voice returns, gentler now, a compass rather than a command. Faith without stepping is a wish. Step. The words sit on your tongue like a truth you can taste. You dial the number of an old friend, and the conversation opens like a window. "Tell me what you want," the friend says. When you speak it aloud, the idea loses its fog and gains edges. Doubt presses in, memories of failed budgets, late notices, the steady ache of not enough. Fear crouches at the edges of hope with familiar teeth. You honor it, you do not invite it to lead. Instead, you draw a line between reverence and paralysis. You write down one practical rule: courage measured, risks intentional. The whisper and the ledger begin to speak to each other. The day offers signs: an article about a business that began with a spare room, an old mentor's message revisited, and each sign feels like scripture for the practical soul. You realize prosperity might be less a miraculous rain and more a cultivated garden, watered by consistent acts and small, sacred choices. If this moment touches something inside you, stay with me. There's a path ahead that turns whisper into work, and work into fruit. Like this truth if it lands in you, subscribe and ring the bell to keep receiving the next instruction. Tomorrow, the first real test arrives, and what you decided today will be the compass you carry into it. The next days feel like walking through fog. You wake with the whisper still warm on your skin, but the world around you is blunt: overdue notices on your kitchen table, a car that coughs at the light, text messages that sound smaller and colder than they did a month ago. Fear arrives in practical clothes: a landlord's voicemail, a missed payment, the client who ghosts you. Each setback is a shout that wants you to forget the gentle voice that nudged you awake. You find yourself bargaining with God the way you used to bargain with yourself, promising better habits, more discipline, more prayer, always tomorrow. The old habits answer with comforting logic: "This is just bad timing, you tried, maybe you're not cut out for more." Then a mentor appears, not grandly but simply, a woman at the corner cafe, her coat dusted with rain like silver, who notices the stack of bills and the photograph of you at a younger, hungrier self. She sits without asking, pours 2 coffees, and speaks like someone who's learned to hold risk as a living thing. "Listen," she says, tapping a worn notebook. "God doesn't just give messages, He trains hands to carry them. You can't steward a seed if you refuse to water it." Her words land as both balm and instruction. You ask, almost defensively, "But what if I fail?" She smiles, "What if you try? What if failure is a class you pay for, and prosperity is the degree?" Small signs begin to arrange themselves like punctuation in your week. A neighbor returns a borrowed book with a highlighted passage about margin. A forgotten email delivers an unexpected opportunity to consult for an afternoon. You start to notice patterns: small consistent deposits into your time and money create a quiet compound, like interest in a hidden bank. You draft a budget on a napkin, not as punishment but as promise. You schedule 30 minutes each morning to learn one practical skill. Each tiny action feels like an answering prayer, awkward, imperfect, but real. Dialogue with the whisper grows clearer. Fear speaks in absolute terms, the whisper in invitations. When you finally take a modest risk, pitching an idea to a skeptical partner, investing a small savings into your craft, you feel both terror and a peculiar lightness. It is here, on the ledge between hesitance and movement, that a revelation begins to crystallize. Faith demands motion. The next step will show what that motion will cost, and what it will return. Night after night, the whisper returns, softer now, tested by the noise of life. You wake to the message and carry it into daylight: a mortgage notice on the kitchen table, an unanswered email, a neighbor's casual question about your plans. Doubt sits at the table with your coffee. Old habits, spending to soothe stress, waiting for the perfect moment, shrinking your ambitions to fit your fear, press against the edges of that whisper until it almost feels like a dream. Then a mentor appears the way mentors do, not as a miracle but as a presence who sees the pattern beneath your panic. In a dim cafe they fold their hands around a mug and tell you, quietly, the truth you already suspected. Prosperity, they say, is not luck. It is a language. You must learn its grammar: small, steady actions, clear decisions, boundaries that protect your future. They slide a worn notebook across the table, pages full of budgets, timelines, and tiny deadlines. Action is faith in motion, they add. Faith without the ledger is just hope. The tests come like weather. A project you invested in falters. An old friend urges you back to what's comfortable. Your inner critic catalogs every potential failure. But among these storms are signs: a conversation with a freelancer that sparks a new product idea, an unexpected client who pays on time, a sermon that reframes your scarcity as a challenge to steward what you are given. Each small success is a parable: a saved dollar that became an invested seed, a disciplined hour that multiplied into competence. You begin to trade grand prayers for precise plans. You set a budget the way you'd set a boundary for a relationship. You take the calculated risk of a side offering, staying awake with spreadsheets and strategy, listening to the whisper and testing it against reality. Courage looks ordinary now: making the hard call to say no, choosing consistent work over a quick comfort, asking for help when you lack skill. There is fear still, but it sits beside a new resolve. The message has shifted from possibility to instruction. You start to see prosperity as something you steward, not merely receive. Small choices keep compounding into momentum. If the whisper is a seed, these days are the slow, necessary rain. If this resonates, like what you feel and subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next, where faith and work begin to align and the first real growth shows itself. Night stretches long across the apartment. The only light is the blue glow from a laptop, spreadsheets like frost across the screen. You trace numbers you once thought would bend toward freedom: rent, debts, a line item called fear. Outside, the city breathes and forgets. Inside, the whisper returns, softer now, more insistent: move. But movement requires more than longing. It requires practice. A knock at the door, and with it an old friend who has the quiet of someone who has walked the same stones and not been crushed. They sit at the small kitchen table, hands folded around a mug that radiates warmth. Prosperity, they say, is not a single miracle. It's a rhythm. Their voice is neither preacher nor banker, it is the voice of someone who has learned to answer whispers with plans. They pull a notebook from their coat and draw a line: intention, habit, margin. 3 words that feel like scripture for everyday life. You argue about risks, about past failures, but each reluctance is met with a story: the bakery that kept an extra day of bread and survived a storm, the teacher who invested in a course and found a new income, the neighbor who learned to say no and built margin where debt once lived. Small examples, almost mundane, but they land like seeds in soil finally tilled. One by one, you test them: track a week of spending, wake 30 minutes earlier to write ideas, call one person who might open a door. Each tiny action is humbling and electrifying at once. At a street corner, you stand beneath a neon sign that hums like a promise and feel the old fear flare. The whisper asks for courage, measured courage, not recklessness. Faith without action is a prayer left on the altar, the friend says. Action without care is chance. Blend them. You see, in the quiet calculus of everyday life, stewardship becomes the bridge between the divine whisper and your bank account. If this moment lands on you, if the idea that small, disciplined steps can transform your finances and your life moves something inside, give it a like. Let that be the first public act of commitment. Subscribe and ring the bell. Walk with us as we translate whispers into plans, plans into habits, habits into prosperity. Tomorrow brings a harder door to open, and beyond it a choice that will ask everything you have learned so far. You wake before dawn again, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the kettle and the whisper that has become a companion. The notebook lies open on the kitchen table, pages filled with small, deliberate rituals, a budget reviewed each Sunday, an hour of learning 3 times a week, one offer made every Monday. Outside, the city begins to stir, buses sighing, a dog walker's laugh, and you feel the odd steadiness of someone moving with intention. The restless ache that once felt like hunger now reads more like a map. A call from Anna, the mentor with the patient voice, lands like light on a shaded path. "What step are you taking today?" she asks. You tell her the plan, a modest investment in a course, a price negotiated down, a prototype to show 3 potential clients. Her laugh is a small bell. "Risk is the grammar of faith," she says. But grammar without practice is poetry that never speaks. The phrase sits in you like an ember. You make the calls. One answer is polite no, another is ambiguous, the third becomes a meeting at a coffee shop filled with the smell of espresso and the clack of keyboards. You present the idea, your hands steady because they know the script of preparation. The client points to weaknesses and to what they will pay for if you fix them. You walk away with a conditional yes and a deadline that tastes like both pressure and possibility. That night, a problem arrives, a spreadsheet error, a bank transfer delayed, and for a moment the old voice of doubt re-enters. Maybe you were reckless, maybe the whisper was indulgence. You breathe. You remember the small disciplines, tracking, pivoting, asking for help. You call a former colleague, send a clarifying email, correct the numbers. Each correction is a stitch, each phone call a prayer answered in practicality. A week later, the conditional yes becomes a deposit in your account, not life-changing, but undeniable. It is money earned by courage translated into action. You stand in the doorway of your apartment, sunlight catching the edge of the envelope, and feel the revelation settle, faith not as idle hope but as decisions kept, habits squared with risk. If this thread resonates, if you want the exact steps that turned whispers into a steady rhythm, like this moment and subscribe with the bell to follow as the next scenes show how small trusts compound into real abundance. The morning light finds you already awake, not because sleep refused you but because something inside has shifted, a small, steady insistence that will not be ignored. You cross the kitchen where the same kettle boils, but now you pause to read the numbers on a ledger you once kept hidden in a drawer. The ink looks different today, each sum is an answer written in your hand. There is a soft memory of the whisper that started this journey, and it hums beneath every sound, act, steward, give, receive. Outside, the city moves with indifferent rhythm, inside, your life rearranges. A mentor stops by, his coat dusted with rain, and hands you a folded note. "You've learned the hard part," he says, eyes steady. "Now learn the careful part." His words are not comfort but instruction, how to allocate, how to say no, how to multiply without losing your soul. You walk through them slowly, like learning a sacred language. You practice the discipline of small, consistent choices, a meeting that becomes a contract, a conversation that becomes a partnership, a weekly habit that becomes capital. Each act is faith in motion. There are moments that sting. A partner pulls away, old creditors remind you of past nights. Fear visits in the middle of dinner and you pretend to laugh while your hands tremble around a fork. But then a neighbor stops at your door with a loaf of bread and an honest compliment. A client returns for work you delivered with integrity. The whisper follows, you were chosen for stewardship, not luck. You realize prosperity has reshaped your relationships, people mirror back a steadier you, and some distance itself as the new contours of your life demand different companions. You stand on the balcony as dusk arrives, the city lights like scripture written in wire and glass, and you feel responsibility settle like a cloak. Prosperity is a promise that requires guardianship, it asks for courage and restraint in equal measure. There is a quiet resolve now, not an end, but a practice. If this unfolding has moved you, give this message a like so its light can reach another restless heart. Join me in what comes next by subscribing and tapping the bell. Together we'll step into the moment that proves the whisper was not a dream but a summons to act. In the next scene, a single choice will test everything you've built and reveal what stewardship truly costs. Sunlight pours through the blinds, painting the desk in stripes. You sit with a stack of receipts, a spreadsheet open, and a breath that feels different now, less panic, more purpose. Outside, the city moves with its usual hurry, but inside your small room the air is quieter, as if the whisper that began this journey has settled into a steady rhythm. You run your finger along numbers that used to scare you, now they read like terrain you are learning to navigate. The account balance rises not by luck, but by choices, a disciplined budget, a sales call you finally made, a small investment you treated like a promise. Your phone buzzes. It's Anna, the mentor who taught you how to translate faith into a plan. How are the margins looking? She asks. You hear pride in her voice and the kind of challenge that keeps you honest. Growing, you answer. Not perfect, but growing because I'm willing to adjust. There's a pause, and then she reminds you, stewardship is never finished. It's a practice. Keep the promises you make to yourself and to others. Her words land like a benediction and a check at the same time. Later, at the kitchen table, your partner pours coffee and watches you with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Your child asks why you're smiling while doing taxes. You laugh and say, because now I know I'm building something that steadies us. The smile you give is different, calmer, anchored to meaning rather than money alone. The neighbors notice too, small congratulations, a referral, an invitation to collaborate. Prosperity shifts the shape of your days, it makes room for generosity and for boundaries that protect what matters. But the test doesn't stop. An attractive shortcut appears, a risky deal that promises quick gains and whispers old fears. What if you miss this? The whisper you learn to listen for, the steady, gentle voice of God you trust now, nudges, choose with courage, not haste. You breathe, weigh the facts, and decline what would compromise the long-term promise. You realize abundance now asks more of you than hope, consistency, discernment, and giving back what you can steward well. If this moment resonates, tap like to honor the courage it took to stay the course, and subscribe with the bell so you won't miss the final step, the moment your choices become the life you were whispered into. You wake before dawn, the city still breathing slow and gray, and the whisper that began it all returns, not loud, not miraculous, but steady as a tide. It says, again, that abundance is not a miracle to be caught but a language you must learn. You stand at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling, spreadsheets and sticky notes like small islands of past anxiety. On the screen, numbers flicker, some red, some hopeful green. You close your eyes and remember the first whisper, the mentor's quiet counsel, the small bets that felt like faith and not folly. You remember failing, and how each failure taught you to steward better. A voice, yours, and not only yours, asks, what are you willing to protect? What are you willing to risk? Your partner appears behind you, hands finding yours. You've changed, they say simply. You plan differently now. There is no sermon in their voice, only a mirror. You smile, thinking of the habits that became rituals, tracking, giving, learning, offering time as well as money. You think of the friend who called with a job lead because they saw you finally living your why. You think of the mentor's last line, action is faith in motion. Out on the street, sunlight finally cuts glass and concrete into bright possibilities. You walk to meet a client, palms steady. The conversation is practical, terms, timelines, trade-offs, but beneath the numbers is a new muscle, courage tempered by calculation. When you sign, it is small at first, a local contract, a modest investment, a promise to hire one apprentice. Yet in the low hum of that signature you feel a shift. It is not windfall, it is rhythm. Money begins to move with intention, relationships rearrange to support vision, and your calendar becomes a map of priorities. A neighbor who once asked for a loan now asks advice. Your ledger fills with explanations, returns explained by work, generosity, and disciplined restraint. At night you sit with the whisper again, asking not for more miracles but for more wisdom. The answer is patient, steward this well, teach what you've learned, be generous without losing sense. You realize prosperity, finally, is less about accumulation and more about capacity, the capacity to give, to sustain, to create a life that echoes the first whisper. And as the horizon lightens, a choice stands before you, larger than any ledger, there is a door you have not yet opened, a public risk that will test everything you've built. You breathe and prepare to step. Dawn finds you at the same kitchen table, but nothing is the same. Sunlight pours across a notebook where names, numbers, and small promises are written in steady hand. The account balance no longer dictates the beat of your breath, your decisions do. Outside, the city wakes, the same hum of traffic, but now it sounds like possibility. You remember the whisper that started it all, and you feel it again, softer, like the echo of an answered prayer. You listened, the voice says, not as a miracle that fell into your lap but as a recognition, faith met with work, hope met with habit. You answer aloud, almost surprised by your own calm, I acted. The voice only smiles in the quiet. Around you, the evidence is small and steady, a client who became a partner, a garden of savings planted and fed, a relationship healed because you could finally give time instead of excuses. Risk wasn't reckless, it was measured, courageous, humble. Failure appeared like a teacher, not a judge, and the lesson stuck. Mentors who once felt distant sit across the table, friends who believed in you before the balance sheet changed now laugh with you about the nights you dared. Prosperity, you learn, is a rhythm, sowing, tending, protecting, and releasing. It is generosity with a stewardship heart. If this moment stirs you, know this promise, the discipline you begin today will compound into more than money. It will buy you choice, time, and an inner freedom that aligns with what you were called to do. Start with one step, one conversation, one budget set, one small risk, and keep it sacred. Be consistent, measure kindly, and return what you can. Your prosperity becomes an offering that transforms not only your life but the lives you touch. If this story moved something inside you, let it ripple outward, like this message with your heart, subscribe to receive more invitations like this, and press the bell so the next whisper finds you when it arrives. The journey does not end here, it asks only for your next brave step.